Okay, great. Hello and welcome, welcome to Healing the Centaur. I'm very happy to be connecting with everyone for this seminar. I teach it kind of on a yearly basis now. Chiron is to me such an important piece of the chart, often gets offered to us maybe, when we're doing more advanced stuff with astrology, but in my opinion, this piece of the natal should just be like baked into the kind of standard offerings of any astrology reading because the placement is so powerful. So today we're going to be working together to build relationship with Chiron. A few things up front. If you've taken a class with me before, you've heard me give this little spiel, but the class is being recorded. You don't have to worry about if you get logged out or if you have to jump out or if your kids need a snack or something happens. The recording will be up on Substack for you after we're done, basically as soon as I can download it and re-upload it. So don't stress about missing material if you can't stay for the duration of the full class. I'm expecting us to run 2 hours just based on the amount of slides that I know I have and how chatty I tend to get. So at the hour mark, we will break. I give us like a 5 minute kind of like wiggle break. And so we don't just have to be in one spot for 2 hours because that's exhausting. Um, I will, say that throughout the class, I'm lecturing over slides, I'm giving you information. If you have questions throughout, put them in the chat box and I'm going to just check in with that periodically and see what's going on in there. And, we'll do a little bit of a Q&A maybe at the end if people are interested in that. But that's kind of all of my good detail up front. And so, yeah, I think that's it. I'm going to jump us into the table of contents here. So we're going to be covering quite a bit of territory today in terms of Chiron. And so this TOC is, I would say, general, more general than the material that we'll be working with. So we're going to think first about Chiron's mythic origins, thinking then about the kind of archetypal symbol of the centaur, breaking it down into its discrete parts of, human body, torso of a man, and then the horse hoof situation, kind of breaking that down into symbols. And I think that that's always very interesting, in my opinion. We'll talk about the astronomical discovery of Chiron because Chiron, unlike the traditional planets, was discovered in 1977. And so he's a really, really new or young piece of the chart. That's probably why he doesn't get baked into the kind of classic or standard approaches to astrology 101, because we haven't worked with him for that long. But I think that we have a lot of data at our fingertips about Chiron at this point. Centaurs on the edge, we're going to think about Chiron and his place in the solar system. And again, the kind of symbolism of asteroids in general. And then awakening Chiron consciousness, just meaning we're going to think about Chiron in all of the different placement possibilities that he might have in your chart. So Chiron in the signs, Chiron in the houses, Chiron in aspect. We'll think about Chiron in relationship, like relationship readings. And then we're going to close out with a kind of, I think, cool contemplation of 4 other centaur asteroid placements that exist in the chart that help us flesh out our vision of what it means to be in relationship with the healer within. So we have a whole world to dip into, and I'm going to turn us into that world. So we begin here at the birth of a centaur, Chiron's mythic origins. So some words from Achilles in Euripides' drama, Iphigenia and Aulis, which is very heartbreaking and everyone should read it ASAP. Achilles writes or says, I was brought up in the house of Chiron, the most righteous of men, and he taught me to act from a simple heart. And so when we think about Chiron, we think of the wounded healer. And he's kind of one of these figures that exists in that sort of tragic lens, right? A person who could heal other people's wounds, but not his own, someone who suffered deeply, someone who suffered both spiritually and physically due to the nature of his wounding. But he also has a whole other sort of mythic role in the ancient world, which is that he was so informed and so wise in the arts of not just healing, but everything from archery to surgery to divination, astrology, music, poetry. It was customary for all of the heroes of myth to stop off with Chiron before they went out into the world, right? Kind of in the hero's journey, Chiron is present in the meet the mentor phase of the hero's journey before the hero goes out into the world to face whatever challenges they're facing. And so I think it's also important to, bring in these other details of Chiron's experience because it makes him more three-dimensional as a figure in myth, right? And so we have proof from other mythic characters that Chiron was not just someone who suffered, but was someone who was cherished by, the community of heroes and the community of other magical creatures that lived around him. But slightly getting ahead of myself. Before we think about Chiron, I want to tell you how centaurs came to be in general, which is a very different kind of origin story than the way that Chiron came to be. So I'll tell you a story now. In ancient days, there was a king named Ixion who ruled over his kingdom in Thessaly. He married a princess named Dia, who was the daughter of King Dionysius, and he promised the king to pay a fee to him after marrying her. Ixion was kind of horrible, and he never kept any promise that he made to anyone. He never paid the dowry, and he just decided that he didn't have to do anything anybody said ever. And so the king snuck into Ixion's stables and stole some of his horses. Without being aware of the theft, coming to awareness of the theft, Ixion was filled with rage and he invited his father-in-law to dinner at his house, to a little party. Upon arriving, Ixion pushed his father-in-law, the king, onto a bed of fire and killed him. He was then outlawed by his community and wandered in exile. This is like crime number one for the ancient Greeks who viewed hospitality to guests as like the highest value, basically, that you could have. Right. So, for reasons that are unclear, Zeus felt bad for Ixion, who was just wandering the world, bemoaning his fate and exile of his own fault. And Zeus decided to invite Ixion to a feast on Mount Olympus and to pardon him of his sin. Who knows why? Upon arriving, Ixion became enamored of Hera, who was Zeus's wife, and determined that he was going to sleep with her. Zeus got really mad and decided to trick Ixion, and he bewitched a cloud and shaped it in the form of Hera. Ixion got caught trying to have his way with this cloud. And from this union of the cloud and Ixion came a figure called Centauros, who would go on to have children with mares on Mount Pelion, thus bringing about the whole race of centaurs. So, talk about a family system that has a really bad seed, literally. Um, family trauma, just like trickling down the whole line from this one guy, right? So, I think that the sort of story here of what happens subsequently to Ixion is that, even though he impregnates the cloud delivers a baby, the baby goes and makes centaurs on Mount Pelion, crazy. Ixion is punished for his crimes. And so Zeus lashes him to a wheel of fire in Hades, where he just spins forevermore as penance for his crimes. Right. So Ixion's behavior is consistent. He commits two crimes against that Greek concept of xenia, which is hospitality and friendship towards guests and strangers. The murder of his father-in-law and his insane desire to sleep with Hera show that he is a very cruel person with really no regard for boundaries and, respect for other people. And so, the images that we have here on this slide and on the previous one, I actually didn't explain that at all. We've got the cloud that is supposed to be Hera. Ixion's over here. The real Hera's over here, and you can tell because her peacock familiar is down here by her feet. And then this is just another rendering of that same story from a mosaic in Pompeii. So, what kind of happens as a result of this is that mythic centaurs born from this union of Ixion and a fiery cloud, the centaurs as a race, as a mythical creature, were known for being pretty violent and barbaric, loving a good fight. They were most famous for a giant war against another group of people called the Lapiths, which was fought because the centaurs tried to carry off the Lapiths women. Right, so transgression abounds wherever the centaurs roam. They are not friendly guys, right? And for those of us wondering what this all means, scholars tend to say that this might indicate a struggle between, what ancient Greek people would consider barbarism, or kind of groups of uncivilized people, and culture, or the battle between wildness and civilization, as the centaur himself is a kind of encapsulation of both things, but we'll get there in a minute. So I think that my main point here is that, the centaur in the myths is rarely going to be the ally to the wandering lost soul. It is a rare thing for Chiron as a centaur to be a gentle, healing, loving figure. So right away, we start to see this divergence of Chiron from his so-called, family, his group that he is supposed to belong to. And that feeling of being the outsider follows Chiron throughout his life. And so specifically now tuning in with Chiron's myth and story. So he is not one of the centaurs who was born from the violation of the cloud. He has a very different origin. So he was born from the union of Saturn, who we know as the god of time, of restriction, of lack, of boundaries and winter and coldness, who took the form of a horse and impregnated a nymph named Philyra. And so, interestingly, scholars also point out that Chiron was the first deity to not be born of incest, because these two figures are not related. So again, we have this sort of, breaking with tradition, breaking of the family tree, breaking of the family spell or the family curse. These are all really important symbols that Chiron in the chart reflects to us that we really only get if we tune in with the myth. Right. And so I hope that I'm modeling some of the work that I think is really important to do when we're translating myth into our natal charts. Right. So as regards his birth and his life, we can say the following. So he's the son of Saturn and Philyra. Saturn took the form of a horse when he laid with Philyra. And whenever the child was born later on, Philyra was horrified to find out, or to realize, that her child was half horse, half human. And she rejected the child outright and said, I will not be responsible for this monster. And so she left him to be, to die of exposure. She abandoned him in the woods and didn't give him another thought. Right. And so right away, we see that kind of being rejected from your family of origin vibe that Chiron speaks to so well. Chiron was discovered, though, by Apollo, who is the god of light, the god of the sun, the god of medicine, of divination, of order. And he raised him as his own son on Mount Pelion. And he taught him everything that there was to know about the arts, about medicine, about music, and all of those good things, right? So I don't know, I'm losing my voice, but I am. So thinking about Chiron's ability to heal, this is his primary function. This is really what he kind of came into his power through, as being a healer, a son of Apollo, who all of the heroes far and wide would come to get advice, for protection, for education, and that was his story. And so, where then does the sort of trouble happen for him? It actually has something to do with Hercules. And so Hercules, one of the heroes who actually really got along well with the other centaurs, the kind of uh, maybe we can call them like fratty, horrible centaurs. Hercules came to visit Mount Pelion one day, and in celebration of his arrival, the centaurs wanted to have a big party, a big feast. And at one point, the centaur Pholus, who was an elder centaur, he's not really a problem centaur, but he has a problematic role in this story. He opens a very ancient cask of wine. And the smell of the wine, either in deep fermentation or just like maybe it was poison, it had been sitting too long, creates this scent in the air that throws the centaurs into madness. And there's a great big stampede. Chiron, who was, working away in his, I guess, his cave at the time, who was poisoning arrows. He was like tipping arrows with poison, got caught up in this stampede, wound up injuring his horse body with his own poisoned arrow. And from that point forward, he had this deep wound on his physical form that he could not heal. And so here lies that sort of wounded healer message or image that we know so well. Chiron was able to heal whoever else's wounds were presented to him, but he suffered via his own wounding. And that was, his fate. At the end of his life, he's suffering so much that he goes down to Hades, to the underworld, and begs Hades to let him take the place of Prometheus. And he says, I know that Prometheus is suffering down here. Prometheus didn't do anything wrong. Let him go and let me take his place. I want to trade my immortality for his life so that I can have relief and die. And Hades grants him this wish. Prometheus comes up, Chiron descends down, and his life ends there. And so it's a really sad story. It's so interesting thinking about that exchange between Prometheus and Chiron. I feel like that could be a whole rabbit hole of symbolic research that happens. But that is the end of his tale, right? And so his mythic influence is really, really important. Here are just a list of figures that he bumps into in the stories that we wouldn't have these great big heroes if we didn't have Chiron training them. So he was responsible for Achilles' education, who was the famed warrior of the Trojan War story. He was a student of Chiron's in early life, right? And so he eventually taught Patroclus, his beloved friend, the medical arts and allowed them to do surgery and heal warriors on the battlefield. He was responsible for Actaeon, who was trained by Chiron to be a great hunter. He was a kind of half brother, adopted brother to Asclepius after Artemis killed his mother, Coronis. And so Asclepius is also another healing figure. He shows up in the myth of Medusa, interesting stuff there. And then Jason is another important hero who Chiron sort of touches in with, who was the leader of the Argonauts who sought the Golden Fleece. He was raised by Chiron, right? So there are really only 4 brief references in Homer to Chiron. And even though they're fleeting, the textual references kind of, locate the seeds of Greek medicine in the wilds of Magnesia, which is where Chiron's cave was supposed to be. So his cave is symbolic of a training center for healers, if you like. Right. So this early motif of the wise centaur instructing all of the Greek heroes in the, skills of medicine and the virtues of heroism endured and was really enhanced by later myth makers. By the late classical period, it became really customary to assume that most heroes with a good reputation had gone to the school of Chiron, had been fostered by Chiron in his Thessalian cave, right? So I think it's a really interesting thread to trace through mythology and through the stories that we wind up knowing. Chiron's like at the root of a lot of these heroic figures, which is really interesting. So, in terms of the environment, I just like to kind of put this into people's brains because, the myths that we imagine happened in, yes, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the ancient Near East, all of these beautiful, wild places. But there are actual locations, like Mount Olympus is a real place. The Oracle of Delphi still, the ruins of it are still there. The temples of Jupiter are still in Rome. So we can pinpoint some actual geographical places for Chiron. So he was raised on the slopes of Mount Pelion. And this is in the Thessaly region of Greece, a part of the Greek world that was always associated with medicine and witchcraft. And so, if you're ever reading a myth and a character comes from Thessaly, they're usually supposed to be a witch or some kind of magical person. The region was also considered to be a very untamed wilderness. So, it was kind of under the purview of Artemis, the Virgin Huntress. And the plain of Thessaly was also figured as the site of the battle of the Olympians and the Titans. And so there's a lot of kind of mythic overlap in this world. And I just love this quote from the book Magic and Religion in the Classical World. Thessaly was always well known for its witches. So it has a very old tradition of witchcraft, and these witches in Thessaly were supposed to be really good at drawing down the moon, just so you know. So we're building out the imaginative world here a little bit. But I want to kind of break down the pieces of the centaur archetypally and just think about what's going on here because we often, of course, we think of a centaur as a creature. It's a full embodied thing. The centaur is, though, both man and animal. It is a man-human hybrid. And in this dichotomy, we find a really interesting kind of binary split that describes what astrological Chiron holds for us, right? So the human form of Chiron is meant to describe Chiron's intellectual abilities. Federico wants to come to class. Hi, Fed. Come here. His teaching capacities, his rational and logical and helpful nature. This is the part of him that helps him meet the solar heroes who come to him for tutoring and for guidance and to kind of be with the best of the best, right? So we have this sort of, rational, logos-oriented figure of Chiron with that human torso. And then the horse body is really, really interesting in contrast because the horse body is the part of him that receives the famous wound, right? The prick of the poisoned arrow. And this represents the vulnerability of the physical, the vulnerability of our physical form, and the kind of animal sense of pure embodiment that exists in all of our experiences. So it's almost as if to say the centaur exists to draw out this natural binary that we all have with the kind of like logos oriented, rational thinking creature side of ourselves, and making then very obvious the animalistic nature that we all have. And so I think that it's a really potent sort of dichotomy that all centaurs hold, right? They are, as Stuart Clark says, creatures at the boundaries of difference. And they literally have a boundary of difference in their physical form. So I think that obviously not all centaurs are able to be dignified, responsible, and intellectual, but they are meant as a whole, as a mythical creature group, to symbolize that split between logical and illogical, rational, irrational, the kind of mind and spirit versus the body and somatic experience. And so Chiron brings those two together, makes them both available for wounding and subsequent healing. And so based on the myths, Chiron's themes, we can pull out some of them here. I would never limit his themes to just a handful of spokes on a slide. But just to get you all started thinking about what he represents, I would say that he is able to hold simultaneous truths like pain and healing, love and sorrow, um, as well as that sort of rational and irrational material of the psyche. He represents a surrender to the divine, as in when he goes down to the underworld to surrender himself. Devotion to the healing arts, making things with our hands. He was a craftsman in a lot of those stories. Um, Growing through difficulty to find deep orientation to our healing gifts, which is what we're going to talk about in class. Being drawn to counterculture or being seen as an outsider. With that comes rejection or difficulty of around the family of origin. Those two things tend to go hand in hand. If you're a counterculture kid, chances are your parents are very confused about what you are talking about. And that's a very chironic experience to be felt as the outsider of your group. And then journeys into the psyche because of his ability to heal both in the realm of meditation as well as in the realm of the body. Right. So these days, it's super common to hear the phrase the wounded healer, especially in esoteric and occult and online spaces. And I feel like it's used quite a bit, but it's never really defined. And so you're in class with a Virgo teacher. We're going to try to define this term. Interestingly enough, and probably not totally surprisingly, um, it was our friend Carl Jung who seems to have originated the phrase the wounded healer in his own body of work. This particularly applied to his theories of psychological countertransference, which is something that happens in therapeutic environments where the therapist is activated by the patient's own stories or wounds, and a kind of identification with the patient happens. Of the healer or the therapist, Jung wrote, "It is his own hurt that gives the measure of his power to heal." Right? So he writes, "A good half of every treatment that probes at all deeply consists in the doctor's examining himself. It is his own hurt that gives a measure of his power to heal. This and nothing else is the meaning of the Greek myth of the wounded physician." And he's talking about Chiron, right? So it's a compelling reference to the Chiron story and the idea that those of us who are drawn to healing professions or healing modalities, whether it's psychoanalysis or tarot or any other kind of divination, that they themselves, as wounded individuals, are seeking healing and then trying to give healing to others is just very humanizing to me, right? I think that it makes it sort of a more down to earth vision of the good doctor, who we're all trying to maybe be in relationship with, either by seeking support through therapeutic, environments, or offering it ourselves to patients, clients, friends. Marie-Louise von Franz, another Jungian, later said, "The wounded healer is the archetype of the self, capital S, meaning our wholeness and the God within. And it is at the bottom of all genuine healing procedures," right? So I love this idea too, that the wounded healer in all of us is actually the fullest representation of self and is what foregrounds all of our healing experiences. So we all embody this archetype at certain points in our lives, whether we're the wounded one or the teacher, or sometimes both simultaneously, like Chiron. So that kind of brings our mythic spiel into conclusion. I'm going to shift gears now and think about astronomical Chiron, but I'd love to pause and just see if anyone has any questions or reflections before I move forward. All right. So, astronomical Chiron, what is going on here? So, Chiron first appeared, the astronomical body, right? That's who we're talking about now, not the centaur. Chiron first appeared in 1977 on some kind of great big space telescope scientific scans that were happening of the sky. He was first observed when astronomers were looking at photographic plates that were dated October 18th. And so we use this chart, the October 18, 1977 chart for his discovery. For years, astrologers had predicted that another planet would emerge somewhere between the inner and outer planets. And here we are. And they were predicting that based on just mathematical calculations, looking at orbital patterns, gravitational pulls of the planets, etc. Chiron is classified as a planetoid, so he's not quite an asteroid and not really large enough to be a planet or like a dwarf planet like Ceres. And he wanders between realms of the sky in a very special way. And so just taking a look at the discovery chart, I think this is a fascinating chart for a few different reasons. So the first time Chiron was seen was when he was at 3 degrees Taurus up here. Oops, come back. Oh no, come back in the 10th house. Right, so he's super visible in the chart. He's very prominent. He's up there in a very visible part of the sky. If we, because I was playing around with asteroids as I like to do, I popped in Apollo, who is known to be his adopted father, and observed the position of Saturn in relation to Apollo. And wouldn't you know, Chiron's 2 dads are both here at the ascendant point in Leo, rising over the eastern horizon point when Chiron was discovered. And so Chiron is in a sign-based square with those 2 dads, but not by, squaring by degree. But it is really, really, really interesting, just symbolically, that Apollo shows up first on the ascendant, followed by Saturn. There is not an asteroid for Philyra, unfortunately, but that is there. Right. So I think that that's really cool. I see some stuff popping up in the chat. Oh my God, the sun is at 3 degrees Taurus today. I did not plan that. That's so cool. Yes, no, nope, this was random. That is really cool. That's a great synchronicity. Thank you for pointing that out. And Matt says my Chiron is at 5 Taurus. So when we have the kind of return or the anniversary of Chiron returning to early Taurus, that will be your Chiron return map. It'll also be Chiron's Chiron return. So that's really cool. Magic. Amazing. So awesome. Okay, so that is a cool astro tidbit. We love that. I also really like that since Chiron is in Taurus, he kind of calls out to or is disposited by Venus, who's here in Libra, who is conjunct Vesta, who is the asteroid of spiritual devotion. And I think that Chiron speaks very, very deeply to that kind of energy. So just interesting things to notice here. And we could spend a lot more time with this chart, but I'm going to keep us moving. So one of the more well-known books about Chiron is called Chiron, The Rainbow Bridge Between Inner and Outer Planets, which is a great title. And it's by an astrologer named Barbara Handclough. The rainbow bridge element, though, what does that mean? What is she talking about? So, one of the things that Chiron is unique for is that he does not have a regular orbit. He has a very, very elliptical orbit, meaning he has a kind of like ovoid way of moving through space. And so he traverses this expanse from kind of like the interior of Saturn's orbit to the interior of Uranus's orbit. And you can see that other planets usually tend to be pretty circular in their motion. There are always exceptions. Pluto is also kind of ovoid in his path in the sky. But because Chiron has this ability to move from the realms really of like, Jupiter, I would say, to Uranus, he acts as this bridge between the traditional planets and the newly discovered modern outer planets. He is thus a bridge between realms in the sky, which is really, really beautiful. So he is the planet that links the personal with the transpersonal because of his orbit. As far as that elliptical path goes, it just makes it so that he spends a lot of time in some signs and very speedy amounts of time in others. For example, he is at his aphelion point, meaning the farthest point from the sun in Aries. And he's been in Aries for the past 7 years. And he's going to be entering Taurus in 2026, right? So he spends the longest amount of time in Aries. He spends the shortest amount of time in Libra. That's at his perihelion, where he's closest to the sun, right? So just even that, everything about Chiron is so symbolic, him kind of, being active in this axis of Aries, Libra, self and other, inner and outer planets, like it's so rich. It's so rich. So this is interesting information, and I just really want to emphasize his ability to, again, bridge that gap between the micro and the macro, the personal and the transpersonal. So Melanie Reinhardt writes that those with Chiron in the signs Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer have a Chiron that describes a kind of general spiritual awakening, as Chiron is far in his orbit from the Earth at this point. Passing through the kind of solar portal of Leo, Chiron is initiated into the gateway of the inner world. And this is her framework. I'm just sharing it with you because I think it's very beautiful. So that inner world has Chiron going from Leo through Virgo. He reaches his perihelion at Libra, which is the sign that's halfway through the zodiac, and it is a pivot point for the spiritual journey. Personal transformation and rebirth are triggered by Chiron's journey through Scorpio, and we gain vision through his transit in Sagittarius. Moving then through the sphere of Saturn, right, into Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces after that, Chiron becomes increasingly focused on the transpersonal. So these are just some little notes to kind of start getting you to think about where your Chiron is in that transformative journey that happens throughout the signs, right? The signs and their pathway, or the signs and their cultivation from Aries to Pisces, are representative of the kind of path of individuation. So where is Chiron on that pathway for you? One component of Chiron that I think is super interesting is that he hangs out in this part of the solar system called the Kuiper Belt. So in the 90s, the Kuiper Belt was discovered by astronomers, and it was thought to contain matter from the universe's creation, right? From the original nebula that formed our solar system. Within this reach, which kind of spans from Neptune to Pluto, it happens that, the asteroid bodies all wind up orbiting. So I know that I limited Chiron from like Saturn to Uranus, but he does dip into the orbit of Neptune as well, into the Kuiper Belt. And so astronomers decided to call a lot of the asteroids that they discovered traveling with Chiron and in the Kuiper Belt, they named them as Centaur asteroids, right? And so this is a very interesting, again, kind of as above, so below thing that happens here. This region of the solar system is something that Melanie Reinhardt likens to a kind of underworld in space. Pluto is the largest object in the space of the Kuiper Belt, and he kind of reigns as the king of that space, as the farthest reaches of our solar system kind of flare out into thousands of asteroid bodies. So we can see a link here between this realm and the very faraway reaches of our unconscious minds. Melanie Reinhardt also reminds us that there is an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, of which Ceres is the largest body. Ceres and Pluto are mythically related via the Persephone story. And so I just think it's all just very poetic food for thought that we have one asteroid realm where Ceres is queen, another one where Pluto is king, just by virtue of their size, right? So thinking about the centaur bodies is something that we'll do at the end of class. But I wanted to give you that astronomical sort of GPS for finding Chiron in space. The idea of centaurs emanating from the far reaches of the solar system is a very evocative idea. We also have another really interesting analog in literature where we see centaurs guarding the seventh ring of hell in Dante's Inferno. And if you look closely at this drawing, you can see here it says Nesso. It's referring to Nessus, who is one of the centaurs. So they are guarding a ring of hell in Dante's Inferno, which is the 14th century poem about the fates of various political and mythic figures in ancient Rome. In Canto 12, as Virgil and Dante are approaching the seventh ring of hell, they notice centaurs guarding it, and they have an interaction with Chiron and Nessus, who ferry them across the river. And in this portion of hell, it's the centaur's job to keep those who committed crimes of violence immersed in a boiling hot pool of blood. That is their fate. The centaurs are very fierce, they're very dedicated to their job. And although none of us want to be immersed in a vat of blood or want to be violent criminals, I do think there's an interesting symbolic connection between the depths of hell, the depths of the subconscious, and the way that Chiron forces us to kind of reckon with and become totally immersed in our stories of wounding in order to find some kind of healing. So again, those old Roman guys in the pool of blood, there's no hope for them, but there is hope for us, right? So that is something that comes up in literature that I think is really beautiful and really interesting. If you're interested in reading Dante's Inferno, if this description caught your ear, I would really recommend the translation by Elio Zappulla, that's Zappulla, published by Vintage Classics. It's just a very readable, very good translation. So just throwing that out there. Okay. So in terms of some other, ideas that we can bring in for Chiron, I really love the idea of the pharmakon coming through for Chiron. The Greek word pharmakon means simultaneously poison and cure. It evokes a kind of contradiction, but what it really shows us is this innate tension or ambiguity between something that has a very, I would say that's a very versatile tool of the healer. As Chiron is a centaur famed for his ability to heal any wound except for his own, astrological Chiron holds this very kaleidoscopic approach to healing, to wounding, and the tension between those extremes. So your Chiron placement, broken down by sign, by house, and aspect, offers a multifaceted story of your innate wounding and the cure that lies therein, right? So learning your Chiron placement allows you to kind of begin the process of finding the healing side of the pharmakon. Right, this idea that something that wounds us can also cure us is very, very important here. So, right, to understand or to kind of bring these ideas together, this quote from Melanie Reinhardt is a reminder of the depth of meaning and richness that can emanate from this placement. She writes, to understand Chiron in enough depth to make it truly part of our own astrological vocabulary ultimately requires each of us to make our own personal journey with it. Chiron represents an emerging spirit of philosophical independence, compassion in the face of suffering, and an ongoing process of learning to trust the inner teacher or guide. And so maybe a closing thought on all of this space symbolism. Chiron and the centaurs can be considered, again, this is an idea for Melanie Reinhardt, as emissaries, agents, or escapees from Pluto's realm because they touch into that Kuiper belt where Pluto is reigning supreme. The resonance between Pluto, Chiron, and the centaurs is very apparent when one observes the kind of psycho-spiritual processes at work in the life of someone who has a very strong Chiron placement or a very strong Pluto placement. These placements are going to shed light on deep interior processes, some of which are very deep, hard to contend with, feel like they're other dimensional, feel like they're coming from the realm of ancestors, the realm of the ungrieved, the realm of the uncelebrated. Chiron can speak to that which is unredeemed, untransformed, and in need of release so as not to become toxic. Chiron enables us to see with compassion into the multivalent darkness of the self, which is the locus of the deepest transformation of the soul. That was all Reinhardt. That wasn't me. It was really good. So to work with Chiron is to acknowledge how multivalent the processes of wounding and healing truly is. His elliptical orbit shows us that there is no perfect path to healing our stuff. And Chiron work is the work of integrating shadow, of bringing the unconscious to consciousness, and of bridging personal and transpersonal experience. So we're going to shift now into thinking about zodiacal Chiron and just thinking about him in the natal chart. But let me check in with the chat. Let's see. Just missed scheduling class 3 years before Chiron's Chiron return. Yep, that's funny. Um, Pinky says, can you discuss centaurs and asteroids in retrograde? Sure. Just briefly, in general, any planet that's retrograde is going to represent a kind of inverted approach to working with the power of that planet. And so if you've got Chiron retrograde, that story of healing and wounding might be something that is found, in a very deeply internal part of the psyche, might be less externally expressed, and you might have a very unique way of kind of backing yourself, as retrograde planets do, into a source of healing for it, right? And so what does that really mean? To me, it means your healing journey is completely unique and no one else can show you how to do it. That doesn't mean that you're alone, but you have to kind of walk a different path than other people. I don't always take Chiron retrograde as the most important retrograde to pay attention to, because he'll wind up being retrograde for quite a bit of the year. And so it's not the most important thing in the chart. It's like, if you have Mars retrograde or Venus retrograde, we're definitely focusing on that. But since Chiron tends to be retrograde for a few months at a time every year, I don't always note it, but that is how I would break that down if somebody in a session was asking me about it. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, great. So let's start thinking now about zodiacal Chiron. So Chiron in the natal chart, right? I think that this is kind of familiar territory if you've had an astrology reading before, if you've looked into Chiron, but here is what I believe Chiron does in the chart. I believe that he represents our initial wounding, which can be delineated by type and experience by interpreting Chiron's house and sign and aspect configuration in our charts. Chiron exists not to show us where we suffer indefinitely, but where we move from a deeply wounded place, a place that deserves healing that only we can give ourselves. This is the message of that astrological placement, right? So the other thing that Chiron can do as a healing placement is show us where we have circular experiences of wounding and healing until something clicks for us, until we get to that rock bottom, perhaps, until we have that life-altering event. And this is not to blame us for our experiences, right? Absolutely not. But it helps us key into and step into the realm of what those experiences are with more awareness. And our Chiron wound, fascinatingly, I think, shows us how we try to give healing to other people as a symbol of the healing that we truly, truly need, right? So it's like that classic thing that I'm sure many people in this class have, because I'm sure that you're all sensitive souls. It's easier to take care of other people and identify their issues than take care of ourselves. Our Chiron placement shows us what kind of healing we want to give away to others because we really need it for ourselves. And so I love thinking of Chiron also, not only as just that wound, but an indicator of what kinds of healing gifts you have in your psyche, in your experience, at your disposal. So I think that that's a very important caveat with Chiron. It does not have to be the pits of Dante's Inferno forever. You also are in relationship with Chiron at different parts of your life based on your transits to Chiron. So there are seasons of life where we're really talking to him, and then there are other seasons of life where we feel like we figured some things out, right? And so we're always in relationship to becoming that sort of healer, teacher, wise figure ourselves. I would also say that, we'll talk about what kind of makes an important Chiron placement. Um, Aspects that Chiron makes to your luminaries, your sun and your moon, very important. And aspects that he might make to your fast moving points, which are the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, IC, and the part of fortune, are all really, really significant for us in the chart. But we'll talk about all of those different aspects as we move through. So I would say just some rules up front. What is it to really interpret Chiron in the chart? The most potent placements may be within 2 to 4 degrees of a hard aspect with a planetary body, angle, or a part of fortune or part of spirit. Hard aspects are conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. It is my astrological observation that we feel those hard aspects more deeply than we feel the soft aspects, the trines, the sextiles. Notice too that I keep that orb value very, very tight, meaning like I'm not looking for a 10-degree conjunction between Chiron and someone's Saturn. However, if you look at your own chart and if you've got a 10-degree orb conjunction between Chiron and your Venus, and you feel like that's part of your story, I am not taking that away from you as your astrologer, right? But my rules are I'm looking for very precise connections in the chart. It is preferable, in terms of interpreting Chiron, for him to be aligned with an inner planet or a fast moving point, meaning he has more personal weight when he is talking to the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. So just keep that in mind because those inner planets have a lot to say about you, your personality, your psyche. Once we start getting into the realms of Jupiter through Pluto, we're kind of in the realms of the transpersonal, of the collective response in astrology, right? So again, if you've got a very strong Chiron-Pluto alignment, I'm not going to tell you that that's nothing. But I look first to Chiron, the inner planets, Chiron, and the angles. Those are just my rules. You can take them and you can break them. I will not have hurt feelings. Right. So I think that if we're looking at a sample chart, which happens to be my chart, here I am in all of my glory. So my Chiron is over here in Cancer in house 7. I would think about Chiron's house placement because this is going to describe the kinds of experiences that Chiron activates through in your life. House 7 happens to be the house of relationships, working with people one-on-one, having a kind of sense of boundariedness and balance interpersonally. And so relationships are the medium of suffering, of connection, of wounding and healing for me. And that is very true. Always had a very strong affinity for the one-on-one friendship, the intense bestie, intense romantic connection, whatever it is, right? So that rings true. Is that my Venus in Scorpio? Is it Chiron on the descendant? No one will know, but this is what we're working with here. Next, I would consider his sign placement, which gives us an indication of the style of expression of that wounding. And so my Chiron is in Cancer. I love to cry. I'm just kidding. I mean, I do, but Cancer is not just about crying. Chiron in Cancer has something to do with a wound around nurture, being nurtured, nurturing other people, feeling connected to the ancestral source of nurture in one's life, in one's family story, right? And so situations that are triggering for somebody with Chiron and Cancer is feeling cut off from that source of nurture. That could be in early life with your family. That could be in partnership later on. It is a very sticky thing. As a result of that, wanting to give lots of nurture to a person to a partner is the kind of immediate knee-jerk reaction with that Chiron in Cancer. And so that's present in my chart, in my experience. I would also say, though, that, I am no longer a teenager, no longer in my 20s. And I think that I've learned a thing or two about the power of Chiron, the power of boundaries, the power of balance, whatever that word means. And I see Chiron now, as I've kind of transformed with him, as my ability to connect with people in my astrological work, in my counseling practice, right? As Chiron was a teacher, an astrologer, a poet, I see him and his conjunction to Jupiter in my seventh house as part of the work that I do with people one-on-one. And I'm very lucky to be able to do that. So that's the medicinal sort of thing that comes through with that Chiron placement. Noticing aspects that are here is always interesting. So Chiron is really just conjunct Jupiter. Chiron conjunct Jupiter can be indicative of wounding coming from a spiritual or faith-based situation, because Jupiter is associated with religion. Jupiter is also quite patriarchal in his sort of, lesser or not as evolved form. And a person might have experiences with like the Catholic Church, for example, having that placement there. There might be a struggle there. And then the need to transform one's own relationship to spirituality in one's lifetime. Chiron is also strongly trine to Pluto and also trine to Venus. And so, the continuing theme of power and shadow, the integration of shadow, relationships being the locus of shadow work is kind of, story that unfolds here. And these are just details that come through. So just wanted to model interpreting a Chiron placement very quickly for you, give you some ideas of things to look at for yourself in your own chart. And so that's there. So we are at the hour part, or the hour mark. And I'm going to break us here because the next thing we're going to do is think about Chiron in signs and houses. So it is 6:31. Let's round up to 6:32. Let's come back at 37 after the hour, and we'll continue our journey here thinking about Chiron in his placements in the natal chart. Okay. See you guys soon. And here we are. We're back. Okay. So I'm popping in with the chat. Let's see. Let's hear. Okay, so I'm seeing questions about different Chiron placements, and we're going to be getting into that. So if I don't answer your questions that are in this chat, we will come back to it, and feel free to remind me if you want further clarification. But we're going to be getting through a lot of material here about Chiron on the angles, Chiron aspecting different things. So I'm just going to keep us moving if that's okay. Okay, so first we're going to start with an exploration of Chiron in the signs and in the houses. And I'll just say up front, there is not necessarily an overlap between house and sign. Like the first house does not necessarily equal Aries, but there is an overlap in the quality of their expression. And this is a little bit confusing for people who are new to astrology. And I just point this out because for the sake of time and space in this session, I have blended the houses and the signs, right? So we're going to see the first slide says Chiron in Aries or the first house. And so what I want to do is encourage an understanding here that I'm not saying that they are the same. If you have Chiron in the particular sign, your Chiron expresses its energy like personality-wise as Aries, for example. If you have Chiron in the first house, you have a Chiron that's going to express itself in the realm of identity, in the realm of the body, which are first house themes. So what you want to do in this part of the session is keep an eye out for your Chiron placement, both by sign and by house, which will probably be on two different slides. So just throwing that out there so that nobody's confused. And slides, are you working? Nope. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, great. So Chiron in Aries or Chiron in the first house, right? So we call this the wounds of self-concept. The early life expression or the early life experiences of a person create a feeling that you are not able or you are not permitted, I should say, to reach out and to take risks. Aries is the sign that initiates. When we have Chiron in Aries, there is going to be a challenge to the concept of the core self that initiates experiences. There might be a rejection of the authentic self-expression in childhood, and there might be this feeling of not knowing how to start the journey of your life, right? Chiron in Aries, Chiron in the first house. The healing journey may revolve then around radical self-acceptance and encouraging the same in others. Next up, we've got Chiron in Taurus, which is a kind of fear of lack. So early life messaging was given to you that material desires were excessive, and this may create a lack mentality and a fear of physical expression, physical experience may be present. Somebody with Chiron and Taurus might either have the desire to overconsume or a fear of consumption. It can manifest in both ways. There is damage done to a person's personal values via rejecting them or denying them in early life. That's the second house component that's coming in. So the healing journey might look like deeply embracing a sense of what is yours and claiming ownership of possessions and life philosophies, right? So grounding into the body, grounding into the fact that it is safe to have is part of that Chiron and Taurus, Chiron and House 2 orientation. Chiron in Gemini, wounding words, right? Our early communication style with this placement might be diminished, negated, or critiqued. There might be an emphasis on not being asked to not take up verbal space. Um, Something that I've noticed is that a lot of like elder millennials who kind of get mixed in with the like young Gen X crowd, or like elder millennials who were around Gen Xers have the Chiron and Gemini placement. And there was still such an emphasis on children being seen and not heard in my friends who have Chiron and Gemini's experience. And so there is often a story around not being allowed to take up space, potentially having wounding experiences with siblings and or in our local environments. There can be a deep attraction to literature or a deep aversion to it. And the healing journey here might look like reclaiming our relationship to our intellectual inspiration and redefining safety in our local environment or in our family of origin. Gemini and House 3 both have the kind of trappings of siblings, neighbors, cousins, like people that we grew up with in early life. And so that family of origin thing is very, very primary for people with Chiron and Gemini. And the communication that happened in those environments is usually pretty life-changing. So keeping an eye on that is really important for those folks. Chiron and Cancer, the heavy ancestral heart. Wounding experiences with one's mother or our feminine expressed primary caregiver are possible. A denial of connection to the origin, separation from the mother or home space, and separation from the ancestral home are all possible. Denial of psychic or intuitive gifts. You might come from a very intuitive line, but your own parents might really be scared of that for reasons of wanting to assimilate, wanting to blend in, wanting to ignore past family trauma. And so healing with Chiron and Cancer looks like really tending to that mother wound that a lot of us have a relationship with anyway. But it is a primary healing experience for people with Chiron in Cancer. I would also say that Chiron in Cancer has this, again, like the message that people with this placement received is that you don't really deserve to be taken care of. but you should take care of other people. And so figuring out how to remother, reparent oneself is a part of that story. So were you overly responsible for other people as a child? If so, you might have some work to do through this Chiron placement. So it's a very interesting and very tender one. Chiron in Leo, or Chiron in the fifth house, is the tender self-image placement. So early messaging was received that being unique, being your unique self was dangerous or to be diminished. And this is different than the Chiron and Gemini thing, where it's like your words were diminished. For Chiron and Leo, it's just like being your wacky little kid self was not okay. It was not safe. And so you had to hide this self that exists within you. Experiences really of like having a hard time connecting to fun, self-expression, or pleasure might be part of the experience here. The healing journey has to revolve around reclaiming creativity, play, and our voice with Chiron in Leo or Chiron in the fifth house. Inner child work is a must for this placement for sure. Right. So with Chiron and Leo, the initial wounding says that you don't deserve to be the crazy artist. You don't deserve to be the little diva. You don't deserve to take up space and have your roar, be heard by other people. And then, of course, you're probably a cheerleader for other people's work, for other people's voices. And how can you turn that back towards yourself and let that be part of your experience? That is the healing path for this placement. Chiron in Virgo is a little bit of a mind-body disconnect. Chiron in Virgo, or house 6, we should say. So the initial messaging was to ignore mind-body connections and hide your needs. Virgo is an earth sign ruled by Mercury. And so the realm of the earth obviously is present in her sign. The realm of the mind is encapsulated by and represented by Mercury. And so there is always this kind of like mind and soma connection in Virgo, as Chiron always kind of inverts the symbolism of the sign that he's in, excuse me. There is this need to really, really acquaint yourself with your own physical experience and your physical needs, as well as the needs of your nervous system and your intellectual life. You might be forced to focus on service to others at the detriment of yourself. That's the sixth house presence. Nervous system dysregulation might be the norm, constantly denying the truth of your own physical experience, which leads to burnout. And so healing looks like integrating your physical and emotional truths and needs and treating yourself with super deep care. Very important. So getting us now halfway through the zodiac, Chiron in Libra in house 7, tender partnerships. So the potential for an asynchronous relationship style due to early messaging that balance or justice just can't be achieved. There's no point. There's always going to be a power dynamic. I'm in charge of you, right? Having like authoritarian parents, not authoritative parents, that's fine. Authoritarian parents who are like, you're just a kid. You're never going to have anything to say that's good. You're never going to have anything to contribute that we need. Just be passive. Just be the kid. Just be here. Right. So getting a lot of messages about how boundaries are not really meant to be observed, promises don't need to be kept, and a kind of consistent imbalance between your emotional needs and the needs of your caretakers is present. So seeking personal justice through the implementation of boundaries is super, super important for this sign and house placement. And just the practice of discernment. My favorite word for Libra is discernment, always, right? The scales are, yes, there to be in balance. But before the scales are balanced, you put two things on the scales, and one of them is probably heavier than the other. You are then discerning the weight, the value, the dimension of one thing versus another. And then through discernment, you bring them into proper balance in relationship. So thinking about discernment as a key word in relationships, in all things for Chiron and Libra and house 7 is very, very vital. Chiron in Scorpio, or the 8th house, the thorn in the psyche. So in early life, there could be a deep wound around the rejection or denial of your autonomy, personal truth, sexuality, or even psychic and intuitive gifts, right? Scorpio takes us into the space of shadow so completely. And so this is a very, very, I would say, tender, very, very personal, very kind of loaded placement for one to have. Life and its many challenges may have introduced to you early on very challenging power dynamics in which you may have felt overpowered. The healing journey then must incorporate reclaiming personal power in all forms and then working to heal things like grief, even shame, because of whatever happened to you in your early experiences, right? So this is like the shadow work placement. This is the dark night of the soul placement, but it exists to show you how strong you are, how powerful you are as a healer of your own wounds, and then likely becoming a kind of healer for others who can guide people through the dark in their own experiences, right? So it's a really deep one. And yes, I like to just hold space around that placement. Very important. Chiron in Sag or Chiron in House 9, wounded philosophies. So early life experiences may have rejected your innate curiosities in a way that's similar to Chiron in Gemini, right? Because they're opposite one another. But rather than like, rejecting maybe the way that you like read or write or like do crafts, which is a Gemini experience. Chiron and Sag or Chiron in the ninth house is like your primary caregivers telling you that your big questions about the world, your big questions about God, about art, about, the just like culture, are not to be asked, are stupid, are bad, are beside the point. There might be, again, wounding or pain around organized religion, teachings from our elders, or broken trust from those who had leadership roles in our community. You might feel inhibited and scared of the wider world as a result. And so healing this necessitates facing what is beyond the horizon line, which is always where Sagittarius wants to go, and finding your place in a spiritual or intellectual or philosophical landscape. Very, very important. Chiron and Capricorn, fear of failure. So, like the other cardinal signs, the potential for injury to the sense of agency is here. And that is because the cardinal signs initiate, right? They're the initiators of the zodiac. And so they have something to do with agency. Early life may have told you that your version of success or your vision of success and happiness was ridiculous, was impossible. Why would you bother? You'll never succeed, you'll never make it. And so we might develop a very hopeless orientation to the idea of achievement. Healing then looks like claiming the exact path that you believe you must walk without investing in the feedback of those who hold you back. And so Chiron in Capricorn or Chiron in House 10 looks like really it's a very hard thing to do, but breaking away from the harsh words or the harsh perspectives of those crueler, maybe family of origin relationships that tell you that you won't make it, and showing to yourself, building your own structure, which is possible, your own ladder to success. You don't need those people, and you will find people along the way who reflect to you your goodness, your capableness, your own impressiveness, and that's how you build your way out of that wound, I would say. But loneliness, isolation, hopelessness, all of those classical Capricorn shadow qualities can be really pronounced with this. So it's important to remind yourself or find ways to prove to yourself that your dreams are possible and achievable. Chiron in Aquarius or Chiron in House 11, fear of social rejection. So this is a very community-oriented Chiron placement. Early life might have brought struggles to connect with your peers, and there may be wounding around friendships and community building as a result. You might feel like an outsider here, and this might create extra loneliness, right? We're still in the realm of a Saturn-ruled Chiron. Healing comes through building mindful orientation to community, to finding your people, and accepting that your social environment must be uniquely suited to your vision, right? So I think that there's an interesting blending of Chiron with Chiron in Aquarius or Chiron in the 11th house, of really kind of prizing and prioritizing the weirdness of your ideas and using that as like a beacon to call in other people that share the same vision as you. And it is hard to believe that that's possible when we've been told from a very early age that that is not available to you. But one of the most healing things to do is to prove to ourselves that those people who hurt us when we were kids have no idea what they're talking about. They're just wrong, right? So that is part of what is here, is to build that social connection, that world of like-minded weirdos, of people that share your vision, and to be a healer also in community space eventually as well is very possible. Last house and sign placement is Chiron in Pisces, the tenderness of the soul. So, early life experiences here might have created a rejection of your innate creativity, sensitivity, healing gifts, compassion, intuition. There might have been a lot of dissociation from the self, from the psyche. You might have been taught to reject what was not provable in favor of what's rational, right? Sometimes people with Chiron and Pisces might show up and say, that's like, none of this is true, right? Because you can't prove it. There's a wound around holding the space for the magic of something. Living with this wound and healing it may require our own deep spiritual creative healing journey. So, kind of going on maybe the path of the hero or the heroine or the fool, with Chiron and Pisces is super, super important here. Also, being of service to community can be really deeply healing for Chiron and Pisces or Chiron in the 12th house, because both of those chart placements have a lot to do with humanity and being a member of the kind of macrocosmic group, right? So, very quick rundown there, but hopefully providing some interesting food for thought. And I'm just going to peek into the chat and see what's going on here, but we're going to move into now Chiron in aspect in the chart. So we're going to continue rounding out this picture of what Chiron does. Okay, so let's see. Leila says, my Chiron is conjunct my moon. I feel like there is a bit of nurture wound too, like Cancer, even though my Chiron is in Aries. That is a great observation. And when we talk about aspects, that's literally what I have on my slide for Chiron moon. There is that kind of wound around nurture. There could definitely be a story of having a tough relationship with your mom having unhealed wounds, mom being a healer herself, right? So it can go in a lot of different directions. But that maternal link is usually so potent with the moon that we have to look to either our mothers or the women who raised us or our maternal line for that story of wounding and healing that has been picked up in your chart, right? You're manifesting that wound. There's a really interesting idea that is in Liz Green's book, The Astrology of Fate, where she's writing about like family systems and how in family systems in astrology, it's usually the case that there is some kind of like wound or psychic rupture that maybe like migrates from, a great grandparent to a grandparent to a mother, and then maybe finds expression in a child's chart in the form of an illness or the form of some kind of collapse or some kind of dysregulation or dysfunction. Because eventually in a family line, that issue, that psychic function has to be manifested. It has to come to life. And so she uses like the myth of Orestes, who wound up, he's famous for killing his mother, Clytemnestra, but he didn't kill his mother in a vacuum. It's like a long family story of cruelty, abuse, murder, lying, betrayal, and then finally manifests in, this horrible, brutal murder at the end of the myth. So, not to bring everyone down, but it's a very interesting analogy, I think, that when we see aspects like Chiron moon or Chiron sun or Chiron on the angle or the midheaven or the IC, it's almost as if to say you're the person who is here to bring that wound into lived experience. And it's a kind of responsibility. It's also really beautiful, right? And so it's a very rich thing to see in the chart. So hope that's not like info overload, but that just all came through as I was thinking about that question. Me with Chiron and Virgo with a literal nervous system disorder. Oh, Chiron and Virgo in the eighth house. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think Chiron is so key. And if we look at him as a glyph, he's literally a key, right? That is really cool. He is the key to our healing. It's a little bit corny to be this way, but I'm showing you the key. Um, and so, yeah, that is there. Cool. Matt says I nailed the ninth house, Chiron and Taurus. Awesome. Caroline says I'm excited to learn about my Chiron placement because mine is sextile Venus, opposite Saturn, while being in Pisces. Fun. Okay, let's think about Chiron in relationship to these other planets in the chart. And thanks everyone for sharing. Okay. Here we go. So natal aspects. And again, these are general starting points for you today. I think that it's always such a hyper-specific thing to interpret a placement. But the best that I can do in lecture form is to give you some tools for unpacking what might be going on if you have an aspect between, Chiron and one of these planets. And so the first thing that I'll say, I actually think that I used to have a slide in here that talked about the different aspects, and I think I took it out. And I wonder why I did that. Do I have an aspect slide? Nope. Okay, so let's just briefly speak into existence what the different aspects are and what they look like. So, in astrology, aspects are the little lines that are in the center of the wheel of any chart, and they represent the distances between the planets. They are kind of the mathematically representative space between planets, and they represent the relationships that the planets have to one another. Some of them are helpful and supportive, others depend on the context, and then another group can be very, very fertile, but also very challenging. And so we have first the conjunction, which is the aspect where planets are in the same sign, give or take like within 8 to 10 degrees of orb value to one another, right? So an example of a conjunction, this is Tom Waite's chart. He's got Mars conjunct Saturn here. They're at 21 and 18 degrees Virgo. That's a conjunction. The next aspect would be the sextile, which is a space of about 60 degrees between two planets. It is symbolized by the shorter blue line in the aspect kind of being drawn out. So here he's got a Pluto-Neptune sextile. And sextiles are supportive, they are warming, they are generative, they're a gift. They have to be consciously engaged in order to be properly used, right? So they're not antagonistic, but we have to lean into them. We have to be like, hello, sextile, I'm tapping you. You're going to be my friend today. We're going to use this resource. The next aspect is the square, which is a space of about 45 degrees of zodiacal space between planets. So here we're seeing a square between Mars at 21 Virgo and Mercury at 23 Sagittarius. And it's represented by the shorter red line here in the chart. Planets that are square each other are always in the same modality. So like Virgo and Sagittarius are both mutable signs. The square is very, very challenging. It creates a sense of pressure that builds up from within. They're volcanic. And so we wouldn't be who we are without squares and oppositions. We need them in order to change and combust and alchemize things. But they can prove to be tricky and they can symbolize a challenge in the chart. The next aspect is the trine, which is the longer blue line in the chart. So here we've got a Pluto Mercury trine in Tom Waits's chart. And so trines are like sextiles. They are a gift. They are something that is supportive. They are nourishing to the psyche, but we have to consciously lean into them and use them. The last aspect is going to be the opposition, of which Tom Waits has none, which is really interesting. They are symbolized by the long red line in the center of a chart, and they are uh, the distance is about 180 degrees between planets, right? So it's like we're cutting the circle in half. Um, Oppositions are also very challenging, but unlike the square, which is about pressure from within, the opposition tends to be about pressure from without. So they can represent power dynamics, power struggles, relationship challenges, relational issues that we have to resolve in our life, right? And so that'll all be in the recording if you feel like listening back to that. But different kinds of aspects offer us different kinds of experiences. And so, what we always want to do with this kind of planetary work is think about the symbolism of both of the planets. So, in this example, the sun is about selfhood, Chiron is about our wound and subsequent healing. And then, what's linking them? If we have a sun Chiron aspect in the chart, is it a square? That is a clash, an internal clash of those two placements. Is it an opposition? That is someone else coming in and telling us that we can't exist as ourselves. Is it a trine? This is maybe a healing tool, right? So that's like the astrology Mad Libs version of this work is like sun equals self, Chiron equals wounded healer, linked by the aspect, whatever the aspect is. And then we use the keyword for that aspect to link them and make a sentence. So I hope that that's an okay overview and feels like it makes sense. So we're going to think now about Chiron in aspect to all the planets, Sun through Pluto, and then we'll think about Chiron in transit, the Chiron cycle, and Chiron in synastry. So we've got some deep territory to still traverse here. Okay, so Sun Chiron aspects, right? The wounded self. The ultimate challenge is going to be that of building a sense of self, feeling present and secure. I think that there is oftentimes early in life a hindrance to one's self-expression and then a compulsion to get it right and to figure out who you are, to see yourself as rejected from the group, or to feel like if you're going to be authentic, you're going to be abandoned. It's the kind of embodiment of the Chironic identity, the ability for a Chiron, kind of story to take over here is very, very strong. I think that in order to heal this, one has to really own their own uniqueness, their own individuality. And so I've got Tom Waits's chart here. He's a musician, he's an American musician, and he is like a true weirdo, outsider, kind of off the beaten path type guy, very unique voice, very unique aesthetic, and truly does kind of seem to step into that wounded healer role. He's always been in that kind of realm of artistry, I would say, of speaking about painful experiences and having a kind of underworld type vibe, basically. But there might have been a struggle in early life with finding himself and finding who he is, right? So, Sun Chiron, I want you to just reflect on the wound to the sun, which is all about self and how you shine. Are you allowed to shine as brightly as you need to? Moon Chiron wounding, right? So the lunar self is wounded in childhood, leading to lots of questions around self-worth. Injuries may come from mom or maternal figures, or there might be some kind of spell or inheritance coming down the maternal line. So healing this means looking into your own heart and accepting your own emotions are valid and using your own emotional strength to heal others and to heal yourself. With Moon Chiron aspects, there can be such a wound around being abandoned, for being emotional, for being in need, for having nurture needs that really were someone else's responsibility to meet. And it just didn't happen for whatever reason, right? So knowing that you deserve to have those needs met is a very, very important piece of the puzzle with Moon Chiron. And so I think that becoming like stepping into the role of mothering is really hard for Moon Chiron people because there's a lot of fear. around that. And I don't just mean having children. Mothering can be anything. Mothering can be with your pets. You can mother your art. You can mother your garden. You can, really anything that needs your nurture, your attention, your care. It might feel hard to give that over. But I think that that's the medicine. We have to learn how to do that, how to give of ourselves in that way. So that's the lesson there. Mercury Chiron aspects, the wounding of words, right? So the Mercury Chiron aspect is going to, inhibit our sense of self-expression via language due to some kind of childhood expectation that your words were incorrect, too much, unwelcome. It often leads to an over focus on communication. I have found people with Moon Chiron can either be pretty quiet, or sorry, Mercury Chiron can either be pretty quiet, feel like they don't want to speak up, or they might be super chatty because they're trying to get it right. And I'm smiling as I say it because I think it's cute, but it's just like it's hard. It's hard for people with this placement. So, the healing part of the journey comes through language. And I would say that, the gift of Chiron here is stepping into, the role of Chiron as the teacher, Chiron as the insight giver, as the communicator, the speech maker, the writer, right? So that is what's healing to people with aspects between Mercury and Chiron. And I'll say too, I know I gave you all that rundown of the different aspect combinations and their meanings. I think that any aspect between Chiron and any planet is challenging. He is a little bit of a malefic. And I say that very gently because I don't want to hurt his feelings, but he has a tendency to really make things uncomfortable at first and then prompt us to sit in our, our healed space. So I think that that's another reason why I'm not delineating all of the aspects that could be made here. If you have any contact between Mercury and Chiron, there is probably some kind of story around language and your comfort with it, as an example. So I just wanted to kind of speak to that too. Venus Chiron, right? The question of values, the question of the appropriateness of love and desire. The Venusian perspective, which is connected to your money stuff, your relationships, your aesthetics, your romantic preferences, is going to be challenged by Chiron. Sometimes there's interference from mom or maternal figures in early life because this is another feminine planet in the chart. And the goal here is going to be to transform yourself through the Venusian principle. And so in this capacity, we see Chiron as the artist. And so for each of these, we're going to see Chiron as a particular sort of healer or figure. But Venus Chiron placements could mean falling into relationships that are, troubling or troubled, attracting wounded people yourself, finding yourself in relationship with people who really need you. And there is a kind of healing dynamic that gets unlocked, but is it healthy for you? Is it sustainable? Do you feel, conversely, like you deserve to make enough money to support yourself, to have what you need to live a comfortable life? Or is there some kind of maybe, inherited family story about money? Is there some kind of fear, again, around having and being comforted? There might be something there. So that is, the overall goal here, again, transforming through the Venusian principle. Very, very important. Mars Chiron aspects are going to sometimes inhibit our actions because Mars is the warrior, the one who takes action on the battlefield. And when he interacts with Chiron, he feels like he can't move or take risks or be the warrior. So he needs to transform this sense of the wounded masculine, right? I would say that working with Moon Chiron and Venus Chiron aspects are about the wounding of the feminine. Mars is the masculine. And so thinking about that wounded warrior is a very important piece of the puzzle. I think that as a healer, Chiron with Mars Chiron can be Chiron as the surgeon or Chiron as the protector or the defender of the boundary. Jupiter Chiron contacts are going to create this feeling of contraction. If Jupiter is the principle of expansion and growth and exploration in our charts, and feeling like the world is available and large and possible for exploration, Chiron Jupiter signatures can kind of like wound our optimism, can make us feel like the world is unsafe, can make us feel like we're not safe to just explore, to take off, to initiate. And this wounding can be brought on by early connections to or contacts with religion or spirituality that's forced on us, or just having a dogmatic primary caregiver, somebody who is like, this is the rule of the world. This is the law. We are not breaking the law, right? Jupiter is very associated with legality and laws and courts. So having this connection to Chiron, if he's making an aspect to Chiron in your chart, we're seeing a sense of transformation through learning. And this is Chiron as the philosopher or the priest or the priestess in a healed regard. Saturn Chiron contacts, damaged structures. So the Saturnian principle is that which gives us the ability to structure our life in a meaningful way. He is the planet of maturity and of boundaries. When we have Saturn Chiron contacts, we are asked to focus on becoming Saturn for ourselves and tend to heal whatever paternal wounds we might have as well. This is going to be healing as Chiron becomes the order maker. It's almost like Chiron becomes Saturn. It's a little bit challenging because Chiron was abandoned by Saturn, right? So what does that mean for us? This looks like overcoming, again, that deep sense of abandonment of the paternal line in our stories. What's a little bit tricky about Chiron Saturn, Chiron Uranus, Chiron Neptune is that for a very long period of time, Chiron was transiting at similar speeds as the outer planets. And so a lot of us in multiple generations, for example, have Uranus Chiron opposition. It'll be in different signs, but it will be present. And so it's a kind of huge chunk of the population that seems to need to do some Uranus Chiron work, but we're getting out of the realm of the personal planets into the transpersonal planets. And so it shifts the interpretation a little bit. The wound has something to do with the collective and our response to it. And I think that that's just something that I should point out as we keep wandering down this path. So Uranus Chiron, revisioning possibility. The Uranian principle is that which makes us take radical action, right? He's the progressive planet. He is very, very interested in expanding our idea through like ideas of the world through invention, through technology, and through just like sudden bursts of insight. As I was saying before, people born between 1950 and 1989 all have this aspect. That is a huge chunk. That's like bigger than any Pluto generation, which is usually the biggest generational planet that we focus on in astrology, right? So it's clearly something that a lot of people came in to the world who are around now to heal and to focus on. Transformation here is, I think, achieved through orienting ourselves to the collective issues around healing, how to bring more radical awareness into the general populace around unique approaches to healing the wound, how to liberate and how to heal at the same time, right? So that's like a human project, I think, that we're all supposed to be contending with, and we'll see how we do with that in the next several years. Neptune Chiron connections are going to symbolize a kind of injured intuition, right? If Neptune is the principle of the collective unconscious, of dreaming, of empathy, fame, escapism, imagination, Neptune Chiron aspects, again, it's a collective sort of vibe, but it's going to invite us to embrace our gifts around intuition, psychic sensitivity. And we see him as Chiron as the dreamer in this aspect orientation. Last bad boy to deal with is Pluto Chiron aspects. If Pluto, also Chiron, represents the kind of underbelly of the world, where shadow and sexuality and truth all kind of converge, Pluto Chiron aspects are going to suggest that someone is maybe injured around the issues of sex, personal autonomy, bodily autonomy, orientations to power. And so a deep knowing of shadow is going to emanate here. This is Chiron as the alchemist. And so just off the top of my head, I know that, there's a good chunk of millennials like myself who have Chiron in Cancer, trine Pluto in Scorpio. This is part of our generational signature. There are probably other generational signatures too that do a similar thing, but I just don't have them in my brain. But it's an interesting thing to look at as far as these generational groups go. What is the relationship between the outers and Chiron? Does that help us kind of understand, you know, what our orientation is to fixing the ills of the world? It might. Right, so thinking about reading Chiron, we've come back now to Tom Waits's chart just to give us an example. And so, how do we interpret Chiron in a natal chart? First, we have to find Chiron. So he's up here at 12 degrees Sagittarius in the first house. Thinking first about the house placement. This is Chiron's field of experience. Chiron in house 1, as we know from our slides before, is about the wound of the self or the wound of initiation. Is there a feeling of kind of fear around stepping out into the arena of life? Is there a feeling of being an outsider? Is there a feeling of being that wounded healer just from the get-go, being that ostracized person? Maybe. We would next identify the sign placement, which is Chiron's style of expression. Chiron in Sagittarius, having a struggle with the kind of pervasive philosophies, spiritual perspectives, and experiences that were espoused in the home, and then looking for something spiritual as a healing pathway or a healing tool. Right? So I have at number 3, notice if he's in an angular house. The angular houses are houses 1, 4, 7, and 10. They are more visible to other people. And so that will make a more prominent Chiron placement in the chart. And so that is interesting that his Chiron is in house 1. It's very visible to us. Is he aspecting a fast moving point like an angle or the part of fortune? He is really, let's see here. He is sextile the midheaven, which means that he is going to be trine the IC, which is down here. He's also conjunct the sun, right? So the next thing you would do is look at aspects that he's making to other planets. He's conjunct the sun, so he is a prime candidate for, again, this theme. It's very loud, Chiron in the first house. Now Chiron conjunct the sun. This wound of self is very much something I would ask Tom Waits if I was going to read for him. What is the story there? What is the narrative? We also notice that he has, let's see, Chiron is sextile the midheaven, so that's going to have some kind of thing to some kind of story with, does he feel like he is able to cultivate the public image for himself that he wants to? I would say that he has probably done that, but maybe there's a struggle in early life to feel like that's possible. And his Chiron is also square to his Saturn most tightly. So again, I'm feeling like there's a lot of paternal struggle story stuff here because Chiron is conjunct the sun, which can sometimes be a paternal planet. And then Chiron square Saturn is like another dad indicator, right? So is there a challenge? Is there a pressure from the paternal line from one's father to be some kind of person? And then is there a kind of failure to meet that expectation? What is the story, right? So this is the configuration that emerges here. We're noticing how everything connects. And I hope that that feels supportive. I would love to, so I'm overtime. I'm going to keep us moving through Chiron in transit and then the Chiron, the Centaur matrix, and then we'll hold space for questions at the end. Okay, great. So we've talked about Chiron in aspect, and now I want to think about Chiron in transit. This idea of Kairos. This is a quote from Melanie Reinhardt. She writes, Chiron's process stimulates an awakening of consciousness, which in turn encourages the unfolding of our individuality. Its characteristic space is the opening, threshold, link, bridge, or doorway. Its characteristic time, when in transit, to both its own natal place and other planets may be described by the Greek word kairos. So in Greek mythology, the figure Kairos was a god who personified opportunity, a shift in perspective, and a shedding of outmoded ways of being. So it's kind of like right place at the right time. Kairos is like everything unfolding in its own time in a synchronistic kind of way. And so when we're working with Chiron in transit, we're looking really with any planet in transit, but for the sake of today's lecture, it's about Chiron. We're thinking about processing and experiencing our own wounding in our own time so that we can understand how to heal and how to be in relationship with our own story of healing. And so, key moments in a planetary cycle, right? So, this is a very rudimentary chart here, but these are the most important moments in a planetary transit. So, at the beginning of of one's life, we have the natal chart. And so let's pretend like this first star is your natal Chiron. It's not going to move, right? When you're born, your Chiron is over here. And this is the place of initiation for that placement. In time, the next important transit for Chiron for you is going to be at your opening Chiron square. This is the time when transiting Chiron is square by sign and by degree, your natal Chiron. I'm not able to give you an age for that transit like I would for the Saturn cycle or, the Jupiter cycle because of Chiron's own very wobbly orbit. Everyone has a different time of life that they come into relationship with those squares, those oppositions. So it's harder to pin down, with the exception of the Chiron return. So after the opening Chiron square happens, where transiting Chiron is square to your natal Chiron, then we have our Chiron opposition. We can think of this as like a full moon moment for Chiron themes. It is a moment of release, of pressure, of a kind of focus on the need to heal in relationships. It is a turning point in the story, and we are letting go of a lot of psychic material as Chiron in transit opposes our natal Chiron. The closing square is going to be the next time Chiron is squaring your natal Chiron, but this time he is approaching culmination or approaching a return. So is the closing square. You can connect the opening square to the first quarter phase of the lunar cycle, the opposition to the full moon phase, the closing square to the third quarter moon phase, and then the return of Chiron to the same place in your chart where he was when you were born as the kind of new moon moment, the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. And that does happen for everyone around age 51, 52. Right. So looking now, right, we've got Chiron in Aries for a little while longer. What house is Chiron transiting in your own chart? This is the place of spiritual healing and of opportunity for healing for several years of your life. So familiarizing yourself with your own chart's orientation, what house placements do you notice coming up? Because even though you've got your natal Chiron, and that's kind of enough to contend with, I would say, thinking about Chiron in transit also shows us where you are at in your own healing journey. Ask yourself if Chiron is aspecting your natal Chiron while he's transiting right now. And then just whatever house he is transiting through is a house of deep, deep learning for you right now, right? So whatever house is governed by Aries has been dug up, has been excavated for the past 6 years, 7 years, and we've got a little bit left to go in that experience. So that's just some, brief work that you can do with that. I want to offer some ideas about Chiron in synastry for fun. So synastry is the art of holding two charts together and looking at the relationship between the two charts. You can do this with your partners, you can do this with your parents, your grandparents, you can do it with your pets if you know what time your pet was born and where. So you can do it with really anything. And holding two charts together gives us an idea of how people's placements interact, what you emphasize in someone else's chart, what you challenge in someone else's chart, right? It's not always sunshine and rainbows. And so thinking of Chiron in synastry, he can be a really important window into two people's attachment styles and how they interact. It can also be used as a tool for healing in partnership. And when we look at where Chiron sits in two people's charts, we can check this out and see like who's activating who and how and where and why. And so what I would do is I would first think about your Chiron placement versus your partner's Chiron placement by sign. Think about the differences in the experiences and the stories of those Chiron placements. Those are the two different wounds that you and your partner are coming into this story with, this relationship with. Then think about where your Chiron lands in your partner's chart. That's where you activate a little healing journey. And are any planets aspected by your Chiron in their chart? And vice versa. Where does their Chiron land in your chart, right? So here is a little visual aid. So I've got my chart as the outer ring and my husband's chart as the inner ring. And Michael is a solar Scorpio with a Libra rising, a Virgo moon. He's an astrologer, he's a poet, he's a good weirdo, and we have a lot of shared journey experiences, I would say, in this lifetime. And so, just looking at our Chiron placements, I've always thought this is interesting. My Chiron is on his midheaven. And so that can mean many different things, but I would like to interpret that as me with my Cancer Chiron being able to heal something either in his ancestral experience, or healing something about his like way of, being a public person, encouraging him to heal the wounds of his public persona, if there are any, if there's like shyness to be seen. I feel like my Chiron placement here can be helpful in bringing out some kind of encouragement of like, yes, step into that role, step into that vision. It could be, though, that I might have an inhibiting effect if we don't have a good relationship, right? So that Chiron could be the wound on the midheaven. I don't think that's true, but it could be interpreted that way. So if you have a challenging relationship with someone, angular contacts to Chiron might be something. My Chiron also squares his ascendant, right? So that is another important connection. His Chiron is right on my moon. And so, a lot of our relationship does have to do with a kind of like redefining nurture, both from our own families of origin, which are pretty traditional, and he and I are pretty not traditional. Thinking of new ways to like show love, to define as love, love as an intellectual pursuit or like sharing of literature, which is like our thing, that Gemini orientation, right? Me, the moon, hearing his words can also be nourishing to his Chiron wound of not feeling prioritized as a speaker in early life. So, synastry with Chiron is really interesting because it shows us where we might, yes, trigger our partners, but it also shows where the deep potential for healing might pop up. So pull up your partner's charts and, check out your Chiron placements. Again, Chiron on an angle and Chiron on personal planets is extra juicy, is extra important to note. And the wounding and healing continues. The patterns continue. Right. So working with Chiron to kind of, wrap him up a tiny bit is really encapsulated by the mythos, right? The familiarizing ourselves with his story, with his mythological and archetypal interpretation. Looking at Chiron in the natal chart next, learning our own natal Chiron shows us how we personally express the symbols of the centaur. And then Chiron in transit or Chiron in synastry can cue us into our temporal relationship with Chiron and show us where we are at on our own healing path. Right. So all of these are important when we're talking about Chiron, when we're working with Chiron, and we want to just kind of enrich our perspective of this placement. So I'm going to now kind of round into home plate with this last little contemplation of centaurness, and then I will dip into the questions. And I thank everyone for being patient with me. So, horse of a different color, centaurs of a different color. So, we're going to just contemplate some asteroids now, right? So, there are in astrological and astronomical findings hundreds of thousands of asteroids. There are so many asteroids, and there are about like 23,000 of them that are named. A lot of them have the names of mythic figures like Electra, like Medusa, like the Sphinx, like Clytemnestra. And I love working with asteroids because we get to directly engage and bring in insight from other mythic narratives by plugging these asteroids into our chart and seeing where they land. It's almost a way of saying, why do I have a relationship with this character? Let me pop that asteroid into the chart. Oh my God, I've got Shakespeare conjunct my ascendant. That's why I'm obsessed with Midsummer Night's Dream. I don't know. These kind of synchronistic connections that the asteroids allow us to see are very, very exciting. They expand us past the stories of just like the Olympian gods, and they get us into some of the weirder, wilder, more niche stories and archetypal experiences symbolized by figures like Orpheus, like Hercules, like Nessus. All of these cool, archetypal complexes basically can arise. And so I see asteroids as guardian spirits or guiding angels in the chart. And when they are placed into the chart, we're shown where we relate to different archetypal experiences and stories as a result. So that's just asteroid-ness in general. And there are a handful of asteroids that are named for centaur figures in mythology. And so I've come up with this map that I call the centaur matrix. And I'm borrowing from Demetra George's divine feminine matrix, basically, that she has in her book, Asteroid Goddesses, which talks all about Juno, Vesta, Ceres, and Pallas, right? So I just wanted to shout that out and give credit there. But I have pulled 4 extra asteroid placements that are named for centaur or centaur adjacent figures. And it creates this kind of deeper relationship with the centaur mythos, the centaur experience, the healing process for us. And so we're going to move through these characters, but I just want to show you what this chart symbolizes here. And so I'm pretending that this is a natal chart. The circle of spirit is represented here on the outside. And then we have the cross of matter, which creates the 4 angles of the chart. The ascendant here, the IC here, the descendant here, and the MC over here. I place the figure Pholus at the initiation point, the ascendant point of the chart, because Pholus is the centaur who initiates Chiron's healing experience or wounding experience. Where we see Pholus, we say, this is where the lid comes off. This is where the wound is unleashed. And so the story of wounding begins here, just like the story of the natal chart begins at the ascendant. So we have him here. The next figure is Nessus down here at the IC point. Nessus is not a friendly centaur. He is an abusive centaur, and he symbolizes the path to becoming a better ancestor and the path that we need to take to heal ancestral wounds. So we'll talk all about him. The third asteroid of centaur experience is Chariklo or Chariklo. She is not a centaur, but she is a nymph, and she was Chiron's wife. And she symbolizes loving someone despite their wound or even because of their deep wounding. She is a reflection of selfless love and devotion in the face of immense suffering. So we stick her over here on the descendant angle or the angle of the partner. Okiroe is the daughter of Chiron and Chariklo, and she was a prophetess. And she had a lot of struggles with her dad, but she represents the kind of futural, psychic, healed self. And so this is our centaur matrix. Of course, Chiron is at the center, right? So to just write that all down, Pholus is where the lid comes off. Nessus is the ancestral cry. Cheriklo is relational grace. And Okiroi is futural vision. And so we're just going to kind of move through these asteroids. So Pholus is asteroid number 5145. If you go to astro.com and scroll down in like the chart calculation screen, there's an additional objects box. Type in asteroid 5145. You will see Pholus populate in your chart. So Pholus is the centaur who's responsible for opening the casks of wine that create the rush of madness and stampede, which leads to Chiron's wounding by the poisoned arrow. And so in the chart, Pholus may point to a place of rupture where healing issues explode into view and where the lid comes off after a long period of pressure. So he is like, if Chiron is the wound, Pholus may give us insight into where the wound was initiated, or where the wounds might have like been sparked. So I think he's a very, very potent placement for that reason. Nessus is asteroid number 7066. Nessus is a bad guy. In the myths, Nessus shows up. He is a centaur who is guarding a river. He is guarding this river, and Hercules and his wife Deianira approach the river, and Nessus says to Hercules, "You are strong enough to ford the river yourself, but I will carry your wife on my back. I'm the river guardian. I'll take her across and you guys can go on your way." Hercules says, okay, puts Deianira on his back, and as they're halfway through the river, Nessus takes off with Deianira to abduct her. Hercules, because he's Hercules, catches up with them and he kills Nessus for this betrayal. But as Nessus is dying, he speaks to Deianira and he says to her that his blood is a love potion. And if she collects it and sprinkles it on Hercules' tunic, he will stay devoted to her forever. I don't know why she would listen to him, but she does because it's a myth and we have to do amor fati in the myths. And she winds up inadvertently, accidentally killing Hercules because, of course, Nessus lied, right? And so Nessus is symbolic in the myths of, betrayal, of abuse, of power struggle, and of, just lies. In the chart, Nessus can be an intense placement to consider because of his story, but scholars who work with the centaur asteroids say that Nessus in the chart represents a deeply buried ancestral pain or ancestral story of betrayal. And if we have a prominent Nessus placement, it suggests that we are here to learn how to become a better ancestor and how to speak truthfully about the pain that is hidden in our family. And so that is a really intense placement to consider, but very, very kind of fascinating because, again, if Chiron is the wound, if Pholus is what triggered the wound, Nessus is like the ancestral root of that wound. It's really interesting to trace. So that's Nessus. Cheriklo is asteroid number 10199. She's a nymph, not a centaur. She's the wife of Chiron. She's the foster mom to Asclepius and Achilles, and she's the mother of Okiroi. And she was, again, like I said before, able to love Chiron, even though he was deeply, deeply suffering. Her name, Chariklo, means graceful spinner, comes from the Greek words karsis, which is grace, and klosis, which is to spin, right? Clotho is one of the fates who spins the thread. And so in this little vase painting here, she's accompanying Leto, who is the mother of the god Apollon. So she shows up in art, she shows up in the stories, not a lot of them, but she's most well known for, again, just being present with Cheriklo and being able to give love to Chiron. And so she is symbolic in the chart of a kind of healing vision, a sense of unconditional love, the healing power of our love when it's given to others, what it means to love under pressure, and where our love can transform the pain of other people. So she has a very relational component. Okiroe is the daughter of Cheriklo, Cariclo, and Chiron, asteroid number 52872. And she had a very unpleasant experience with Chiron. And so Okiroe was transformed into a horse, fully a horse, because she was a prophetess. And she actually revealed that he would wind up forsaking his immortality. And this apparently disturbed him very much. Uh, and so Chiron heard her prophecy and did not like what she had to say. And so he took away her ability to speak. This is a sad story about Chiron. This is a kind of aggro side of him that we don't usually hear about, but this is a story in, I think it's in Ovid's Metamorphosis. Right. And so Chiron taking away her ability to speak, even though she's able to prophesy and predict the fate of things. So as a chart element, her themes are oriented towards our intuition and prophetic abilities, and then the way that family dynamics might hinder those gifts, those visions, and finding ways to synthesize, the family truth with our lived experience and not having our voice taken away as a result of that story. Right. So kind of bringing us back to my little diagram, Pholus over here, right? He is the guy who opened the wine that caused the stampede. It's the wound's initiation. Nessus down here, speaking to ancestral pain. Cheriklo, thinking about relational healing. And then Okiroe, prophetic gifts and visions. So experiment with putting those placements in the chart and seeing where they land. So this is my last slide, and it's another quote from Melanie Reinhardt. She writes, Chiron's process is like the formation of a diamond, a familiar symbol for the multifaceted qualities of the deep self. And I hope that this has been a cool and informative class for everyone. Thank you for being here with me a little bit over time as well. I really appreciate everyone's time and attention. And let me just look at the chat. So Eliana is saying, will you be sharing these slides with us? Yes, all the slides will be there for you. Just like always. So there will be like a Substack post that you'll get in your email, and I'll have the video up and the slides. Okay, Melanie says, my moon, Scorpio, is at the 29th degree and Chiron is in Sag at 0. Is that a conjunction? That's so interesting. So yeah, I would count that. Hellenistic astrologers would say no because they are obsessed with things not being in out of sign conjunctions, but there's a 1 degree alignment between your moon and your Chiron. So I would absolutely count that, and combining the qualities of mother and wound, Scorpio and Sagittarius is very relevant in this interpretation. So I would definitely count that. And I love that that's a part of your bond now. That's really cool. LOL, not the damage structures in opposition of me. Oh. Oh, Melanie was listening to Tom Waits before the call. That's so cool. All right. Oh, Jess says, I feel Chiron very relevant in my chart. Not sure how to put it all together. Chiron retrograde in house 1, Taurus with moon. Chiron conjunct ascendant, Sun trine Chiron. Lots of Chiron contacts here. Any overall messages? I would say, without seeing your chart, because that's really what I need in my astrologer brain, unfortunately and fortunately, I would say that having Chiron contact so many of these planets in such tight orb values as well, like thanks for listing those degree values, it is a lot. And it means that Chiron is like a root or a key to maybe unlocking or working with those placements for you. So, thinking about Chiron on the ascendant and Sun trine Chiron, that feels like, the wound of the self is super important to heal, to tend to. Chiron square Venus can be, maybe troubles in the realm of values, relationships, and maybe that is rooted in that kind of self-image question that Sun Chiron or Ascendant Chiron might speak to. The other planets, and Mars Chiron too, it's a little bit of a wider orb. The outer planets, Jupiter, Uranus, those are more kind of general, generational. But I do think that you have a very strong Chiron placement by virtue of it just being on your ascendant. So, how to work with it all is like really, how do we claim the self for ourselves? How do we shine as the sun? How do we step into the role of healer for ourselves and then for other people? So look to the sign placement, look even to the element of your sign placement. Like, if it's a watery Chiron, it might be more emotional. It might be that working with water can be very healing. If it's a fire Chiron, maybe candle magic and passion and expression might be more helpful. So those are good tools to look at. And just continuing to build relationship with that planet and stepping into the role of healer and wounded healer is very, very primary for that chart. Okay, two things. If Triclo asteroids in Cancer, would you say there's some mother and wound healing with that? Yes. Does it hold significance if Chiron is 3 degrees in a sign other than Taurus? The 3 degrees of Chiron in Taurus, we were excited about just because that's where he was when he was discovered. So your degree placement for Chiron in general doesn't super matter unless like he's aspect, like we care about the degree for the planets that he's aspecting, but you don't have to hold that 3rd degree of Taurus in your mind at all. That was just for the discovery chart and where he will eventually make his return in a couple of years. So I hope that's clarifying. What is your advice for going through the Chiron return? I haven't done it yet, so I don't know, but it seems like when people get to their Chiron return, they are wise and they know themselves really, really well. I think that it looks like a deep shedding from what I've observed from my friends and clients, a real serious shedding of like the last layer of, you know, harmful programming, the last layer of being in not self mode, the last layer of accepting other people's garbage and really stepping into an empowered version of self. So that's kind of how I would speak to that, Layla. And it's a lovely question. Let's see. I did not mention Chiron and the nodes. Um, and I think that Chiron and the nodes, I mean, it depends on what aspect is there, but if the nodes are about the path of fate and Chiron is involved in those nodes, you might wind up meeting a healer who helps you on that path of fate, or Chiron's story might be the thing that catalyzes something that you experience on that fated path as well. So that's kind of how I would hold Chiron and the nodes, Eliana. Cool. Mary has a Cheroklo Chiron conjunction. Ooh, you have a couple. That's really cute. That's interesting. So it's like the wound and then the unconditional love is co-present. It's really beautiful, actually, Mary. I think that's really pretty. Um, yeah. All right, my dears. So unless we have other questions, I'm going to wind us down. Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for a lovely, lovely evening. Um, I love talking about Chiron stuff and centaurs in general. So thanks so much for your time, and I will talk to you guys soon. Have a great night.